अस्सलाम वालेकुम। मौलाना आज़ाद चेयर, मौलाना आज़ाद नेशनल उर्दू यूनिवर्सिटी और डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ मास कम्युनिकेशन एंड जर्नलिज्म की तरफ से पेश किए जाने वाले इस 2 रोज़ा बैनुल-अक़वामी मुज़ाकरे में आप तमाम का खैर मक़दम है। आज के इस इजलास की सदारत हमारे शुबे तारीख़ के सदर प्रोफेसर दानिश मोइन साहब फरमा रहे हैं। प्रोफेसर दानिश मोइन साहब से गुजारिश है कि आप स्टेज पर तशरीफ़ लाएँ और आपके साथ साथ हमारे दरमियान ये हमारी खुशबख्ती है कि नोटेड हिस्टोरियन प्रोफेसर सैयद इरफान हबीब साहब भी तशरीफ़ फरमा हैं। सर आपसे गुजारिश है प्रोफेसर इम्तियाज़ हसनैन साहब हमारे यहाँ प्रोफेसर आज़ाद चेयर हैं, आपसे भी गुजारिश है। प्रोफेसर मोहम्मद सज्जाद साहब, डॉक्टर आमिर अली, डॉक्टर शौना रॉड्रिज और जनाब दानिश इकबाल, आप तमाम से गुजारिश है कि स्टेज पर तशरीफ़ लाएँ। फ्रंट रूम जो लोग पीछे बैठे हैं हमारे साथी, आप तमाम से गुजारिश है कि आगे की कुर्सियों पर तशरीफ़ लाएं, क्योंकि प्रोग्राम की रिकॉर्डिंग भी हो रही है, उसकी भी ज़रूरत है। पीछे से भी डॉक्टर दाऊद इब्राहिम साहब, डॉक्टर ओसामा साहब से भी गुजारिश है कि आप लोग आगे तशरीफ़ लाएं। बच्चियों से भी गुजारिश है कि आप लोग अगली रो में आ जाइए। ख़वातीन व हज़रात, सबसे पहले तो मैं माज़रत ख़्वाह हूँ कि प्रोग्राम ज़रा सी ताख़ीर से शुरू हो रहा है। हॉल में हमारे मुअज़्ज़ज़ वाइस चांसलर प्रोफेसर सैयद अनुल हसन साहब तशरीफ़ ला चुके हैं और हमारे रजिस्ट्रार मोहतरम प्रोफेसर इश्तियाक अहमद साहब तशरीफ़ लाए हैं। आप तमाम का खैर मक़दम है इस प्रोग्राम में। जी सबसे पहले मैं अपने मुअज़्ज़ज़ वाइस चांसलर साहब से गुजारिश करूंगा मोहतरम शेखुल जामिया प्रोफेसर सैयद इरफान हबीब साहब की किताब जो उन्होंने मौलाना आज़ाद पर लिखी है उसका इजरा फरमाएंगे। बेहद शुक्रिया सर। और अब मैं नहायत एहतराम के साथ गुजारिश कर रहा हूँ प्रोफेसर सैयद इरफान हबीब साहब से कि इस किताब के हवाले से मुख्तसर गुफ्तगू फरमाएं।
बहुत शुक्रिया मानू और अनुल हसन साहब का कि आज ये मौका दिया मुझे कि यहाँ आकर किताब का इजरा भी हो और बहुत सारी जो बातचीत हम कल से चल रही है वो हम एक दूसरे से बातचीत भी करें मौलाना आज़ाद के नज़रिए से, उनके काम और उनकी सियासत के पस मंज़र में। और मुझे पर्सनली I'm indebted to all of you that you thought of it and spent 2 days in discussing the book, discussing Maulana Azad, not just the book, but so many other things related to Maulana Azad's politics and times and his intellectual life and Islam. All that incorporates Maulana Azad's personality, and we have been talking about it since yesterday, and I think we'll continue that in the light of the book, whatever we had, all friends have thought about him and thought about the work I have done. We will all discuss that. Thank you again. Thank you very much.
बेहद शुक्रिया सर. सर आप कुछ जी बेहद शुक्रिया. नहायत ही मुख्तसर कलमात के साथ आपने अपने ख्यालात का इजहार किया. ये हमारी खुशबख्ती है कि प्रोफेसर सैयद अनिल हसन साहब यहाँ तशरीफ़ फरमा है, और कल सर ने तकरीर में कहा था कि मौलाना आज़ाद पर अगर कोई काम करता है, कोई किताब आती है, तो पहला हक़ मौलाना आज़ाद नेशनल उर्दू यूनिवर्सिटी का है कि उसको वहाँ से लॉन्च किया जाए, उसका इजरा वहाँ किया जाए. हम शुक्रगुजार हैं प्रोफेसर सैयद इरफान हबीब साहब के कि आपने अपनी किताब का इजरा यहाँ कराया. किताब के लिए बेहद मुबारकबाद. अब हम प्रोग्राम को आगे बढ़ाते हैं, और हमारी खुशबख्ती ये भी है कि जो मौलाना आज़ाद नेशनल उर्दू यूनिवर्सिटी में मौलाना आज़ाद चेयर है, उसकी जो अव्वलीन चेयर प्रोफेसर हैं प्रोफेसर आमना किशोर साहबा, हमारे यहाँ शोबा अंग्रेज़ी की सदर रहीं, हमारे स्कूल की डीन रहीं, और हम सब की सरपरस्ती फरमाई है आपने. आपको जब भी हम लोग देखते हैं तो नया हौसला मिलता है. तो आपका इस हॉल में खैर मकदम है मैम. ख़वातीन व हज़रात, आप सब जानते हैं कि मौलाना आज़ाद एक बड़े मुहिब्ब वतन थे, सियासी रहनुमा थे, सहाफ़ी थे, अदीब थे, बहुत बड़े ख़तीब थे, आलिम दीन थे, और ये तमाम हैसियतें, जिस हैसियत से भी उन्होंने काम किया उसको औज कमाल तक पहुँचाया. सहाफ़त में आप सब जानते हैं कि अल हलाल और अल बलाग के ज़रिए उन्होंने किस तरह कौम में नई रूह फूंकी. जब अदब की दुनिया में उन्होंने कदम रखा तो फिर गुबार खातिर जैसी किताब लिखी कि हर यूनिवर्सिटी के निसाब में मकतूबाती अदब के ज़ुमरे में वो शामिल है. फिर जब उन्होंने सियासी रहनुमा के तौर पर जो खिदमत अंजाम दिया, आप सब वाकिफ़ हैं कि आज़ादी से कबल उनकी ज़िंदगी का बेशतर हिस्सा जेल में गुजरा. एक ऐसी शख्सियत जिसकी सियासी बसीरत पर कोई कलाम नहीं, जिसने कहा था कि दो कौमी नज़रिया जो है वो बिल्कुल गैर फितरी नज़रिया है, मज़हब की बुनियाद पर कोई मुल्क तकसीम नहीं किया जा सकता, और उनकी जो पेशिन गोई थी वो सही साबित हुई. 1971 में किस तरह से पाकिस्तान के 2 टुकड़े, बहुत सारी बातें हैं. मौलाना आज़ाद जैसी अबकरी शख्सियत सदियों में पैदा होती है, और यही वजह है कि अब जितनी भी गुफ्तगू होती है, मुख्तलिफ उनकी शख्सियत के पहलू उभरते चले जाते हैं. हमारी खुशबख्ती ये भी है कि हमारी यूनिवर्सिटी का नाम उस अजीम शख्सियत के नाम पर रखा गया है. और प्रोफेसर सैयद अनिल हसन साहब हमारे जो शेखुल जामिया हैं, उनकी निगाह इंतखाब की भी दाद देनी होगी कि वो ऐसे ऐसे हीरे तलाश करके ला रहे हैं कि वो इस यूनिवर्सिटी की जो एकेडमिक फिजा है उसको 4 चांद लगा रहे हैं. जो हमारे पहले चेयर प्रोफेसर थे प्रोफेसर सैयद अजुद्दीन साहब, और उनके बाद प्रोफेसर सैयद इम्तियाज़ साहब यहाँ तशरीफ़ लाए हैं, और जब से इम्तियाज़ साहब आए हैं मुख्तलिफ़ किस्म के प्रोग्राम्स हो रहे हैं, और इससे हमारे यहाँ की जो इल्मी फ़िज़ा है वो उसमें मुसलसल इजाफा हो रहा है, मेयार में बेहतरी आ रही है. इस मुख्तसर सी तमहीद के साथ मैं आज के प्रोग्राम के बारे में मुख्तसर तौर पर बता दूं आप लोगों को कि आज हमारे पास 5 मुकर्ररीन हैं, जिसमें हमारे सदारत प्रोफेसर दानिश मोइन साहब की है. इसके बाद प्रोफेसर मोहम्मद सज्जाद साहब अलीगढ़ मुस्लिम यूनिवर्सिटी साहब का ताल्लुक़ है. डॉक्टर आमिर अली, आपका ताल्लुक़ जवाहरलाल नेहरू यूनिवर्सिटी से है. डॉक्टर शौना रॉड्रिज हैं. डॉक्टर जनाब दानिश इकबाल हैं. प्रोफेसर इम्तियाज़ साहब भी इजहार ख्याल फरमाएंगे, और प्रोफेसर सैयद इरफान हबीब साहब. तो हमारे पास तवील फहरिस्त है, लेकिन हमारे पास वक्त कम है, आज जुमा भी है. तो तमाम मुकर्ररीन से गुजारिश है कि मुख्तसर वक्त में इस हिसाब से गुफ्तगू करें कि 1 बजे तक हमारा ये इजलास मुकम्मल हो जाए. अब मैं इस इजलास के बाकायदा आगाज़ के लिए आज के सदर प्रोफेसर दानिश मोइन साहब से गुजारिश कर रहा हूँ कि आप इफ्तिताही कलमात से नवाजें. प्रोफेसर दानिश मोइन साहब.
Thank you. I must congratulate to the 2 departments. One, the chair of Maulana Azad, Professor Imtiaz, and then of course the Department of Mass Communication, Professor Sham Khan, and they are the person who has organized this thing, and it's a very enlightening lecture yesterday we have heard, and we're also going to hear many of the scholars coming here. So this is the academic activity which you have selected. You must be congratulated for that. You deserve congratulation for that. This is one activity. I also want to say why yesterday our Vice Chancellor, Honorable Vice Chancellor, already said anything related with the personality of Maulana Azad deserve to be highlighted here. And probably this was the reason why we started giving much importance to the study of Maulana Azad, because Maulana Azad is the person who has been widely read, but it has not been understood properly by the student itself. That was the reason many of the department in MANUU introduced paper also to, apart from the chair, we have in English department one paper is being taught on Maulana Azad. Recently, we have started one paper in UG, compulsory paper will be for the Maulana Azad student, and that is not for the history student, but it will be given to all the UG students, the general GE paper. So that is also because we just wanted to encourage the study of. Student has to understand why Maulana Azad should be read, because this present scenario is a very relevant to understand Maulana Azad, because I have encountered many of the right-wing scholars, the way they have been talking about the Maulana Azad, the way they have been projecting Maulana Azad. So we need to understand why Maulana should be read, because our studies are very narrow. We have not studied much. And that is the second point why the scholar, they are coming here, they are going to deliver lecture today. They are of repute. They have a repute, their work has been well recognized by the audience of the thing. So that was also one reason is department deserve to be congratulated, because selection of the name is also very good. And lastly, I must thanks to the organizers for giving me this opportunity to chair this distinguished scholars. I am not the man of modern India. I have not studied much on modern India. My area of specialization is medieval and that too numismatics. But even that you have selected me, I must thanks to you that you have given me this opportunity. I'll try to do justice to my chair. And with this, I just want to start that because 15 minutes is, I think, the right time, because we have 4, 6, 5 people are there. Discussion is also more important, so I'll just give 15 minutes to each scholar. I'll first invite my friend Sajjad to come and give his lecture. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. I will very briefly, I think I will consume less than what I have been assigned. I will very briefly draw attention to some of the aspects on the Azad studies which still remain either neglected or underattended, underexplored. Before I start, in 1953, when Maulana Azad was the education minister, he sanctioned a special grant for the Department of History in Aligarh Muslim University. And with that grant, a special status was given to the department, which had to incorporate Research Institute for Medieval Indian History. The aim of this scheme was to promote research in order to allay the misgivings about the Muslim rule in India. So, and this was a concern of Azad even before independence, because communalism was sort of institutionalized in 19th century itself with the colonial rule. And by early 20th century, Azad had become clear of it that one of the ways of fighting communalism is to allay misgivings about Muslim rule in India. So one of the first things he did was this. Earlier than that, in February 1949, he had a convocation address in the Aligarh Muslim University, and where he emphasized many other things, including multilinguality, and there in an atmosphere of Aligarh in early days of independence, persuading them to learn the script of Hindi as well as to read the literature of Hindi was an important thing to be emphasized by him. But in that convocation address, he also said something which was to affect the confidence of the Muslims in newly independent country with partition, because there was a generalization that Muslims alone were responsible for partition. And Maulana Azad's address, he said many things in that address, as I said, but he spoke few words, few sentences in which he blamed more the Muslims for the partition. And with this, the then Vice Chancellor Zakir Hussain disagreed, and he, in his speech, in that very podium, he tried to underline and argue that British responsibility for partition had to be brought out. Otherwise, it will be rather more difficult for the Muslims to negotiate with their position in independent India. Azad had a very different kind of relationship with Aligarh people. In the second or third decade of the 20th century, some hoodlums belonging to the university had resorted to some what we may call badtamizi with Azad. And even after that, some of the narratives of Muslims were strange for Azad. For example, Mukhtar Masood, in his book Awaz-e-Dost, he insinuated against him, जितना ईमान उनको गांधी पर था, अगर अल्लाह पर होता तो वली होते. This was just an excursus. Of late, I have been intrigued by some concerns pertaining to the leadership of Maulana Azad. For example, in the 1930s, Shariat Act was being drafted and legislated. No book that I have gone through as yet has been able to address this question as to why Jinnah was in the driver's seat so far as legislation of the Shariat Act of 1937 was concerned. He was in the driver's seat, and Azad is found to be almost silent on this. Whereas, if we go through one of the important biographies of Azad, I should take his name, Mushirul Haqs. This was published in 1970. It is not biography of Azad, but it should be taken like that. It is titled Growth of Muslim Politics in India from 1857 to 1947. Better part of the book is biography of Azad, and it's a very critical biography of Azad. And most of the biographies which came up, comprehensive biographies, what they do that they refer to that book, but they don't engage with the book adequately. In that book, it has been emphasized and it has been brought out very clearly that ulama did not have interest in politics till the second decade of 20th century when Azad came. And it was Azad who took the ulama out of their slumber, and he sort of politicized ulama. He created interest of ulama into politics. And so someone who brought ulama into politics, someone who pursued politics based on religion of whatever persuasion, he was not seen in the debate when the Shariat Act was being formulated. And many controversies had emerged. People concerned with gender studies should look into it. In 1931, when this was being done, so Tiwana was one of the biggest landlord family of the undivided Punjab, and they were premiers of Punjab as well. So one of the daughters of that family said, okay, Shariat Act is being legislated. So what will happen to Shariat in terms of daughter's right to inheritance in the landed property of the parents? So Tiwana got disturbed with this. They will be losing land. So he went to Jinnah, and Jinnah said, let me formulate some clever arguments to preempt this. So he said, you see, local customs are the laws. And in Punjab, local custom has to prevail. Shariat will not prevail. And then another argument was that this act is a central act. So provinces will, and agriculture and land is provincial subject. So you rest assured your land will not go to your daughters. And Azad is throughout silent in this. To the limited knowledge, to the best of my knowledge, limited knowledge that I have. Azad was also mostly silent in the Constituent Assembly debates. In the Constituent Assembly debates, he took position only on language issue, and even on that, he had to helplessly quit it. So I will come to some of the instances of his role, that is no role in Constituent Assembly debate, almost no role. Even after independence also, this sort of legacy continued, in the sense that in the post-independence period, some of the literature which came out against partition, that was by Maulana Abul Muhammad Sajjad of Patna, by Madni, Hussain Ahmad Madni, his pamphlet Muttahida Qawmiyat, and Hifzur Rahman Siwharvi, Tehreek-e-Pakistan par ek nazar, which was serialized in the Urdu newspaper Madina of Bijnor. And few more were there. Tufail Ahmad Manglori's Musalmanon Ka Roshan Mustaqbil. So at least 4 or 5 such literature were there, which came out from 1938 to 1945-46. Now, after partitioned independence, when Muslims were facing difficulties, and the blame of partition was almost squarely put on the Muslims, one wonders why these kinds of interventions of resistance to partition could not be popularized. Also, in the first and second general elections, Congress, in order to enlist Muslim support, had to negotiate with and co-opt the ex-Muslim leaguers rather than the Congress leaders. So Congress leaders were not able to influence Muslim votes as much as the leagues, even after independence. This had an implication in many ways. So I come to some of the details of this ulama politics. Peter Hardy, in his Muslims of British India, which was published in 1972, he makes it clear that because of he makes it clear that the way Muslims and their ulama were brought into politics by Azad, it ended up in talking about running the Sharia courts and collecting taxes in the form of zakat to run these affairs. So Peter Hardy says that in this way, the Muslim leadership created a juridical ghetto for the Muslims. So they remained concerned only about their cultural safeguards, safeguarding the cultural rights. And in this way, this was a depoliticizing affair, which became more prominent after independence also, when the Muslims came out on the streets. The Muslims could be mobilized even after India also, not to seek their political empowerment, their economic uplift, their educational uplift. They only remained concerned about cultural safeguards. Mushrul Haq, not only in his book on this Muslim politics, which I would prefer to call Biography of Azad, in his other books as well, Islam in Secular India, then he in 1988, 2 years before he died, he was assassinated, he delivered a lecture in Delhi on Muslim politics today and tomorrow. All these works are available in Urdu also on Rekhta, but Urdu translation नहीं कहना चाहिए, उसको मुसन्निफ ने खुद ही लिखा है, तो उस उर्दू वर्जन को उन्होंने सर्टेन काइंड ऑफ मुस्लिम के सेंसिबिलिटीज को ख्याल रख के लिखा है, इसलिए फेथफुल ट्रांसलेशन उनके टेक्स्ट का नहीं है. उसमें वो समझाने की कोशिश करते हैं कि चूंकि कॉलोनियल पीरियड में ही, और उसमें आज़ाद को सबसे ज़्यादा रिस्पॉन्सिबल ठहराते हैं कि चूंकि आपने हमेशा कल्चरल सेफगार्ड्स ही आपकी प्रायोरिटी रही, इसलिए ये डीपोलिटिसाइजिंग अफेयर रहा, आप पॉलिटिक्स में कुछ कर नहीं सके. कॉन्स्टिट्यूएंट असेंबली में इनके साइलेंस पर अभी एक बुक आई है प्रतिनव अनिल की, अनदर इंडिया, उसमें उसने पूरे डिटेल्स दिए. हालांकि वो बुक बहुत स्ट्रांगली रेकमेंड करने का नहीं है, वो बहुत पोलेमिकल है, लेकिन इसके लिए उसने एविडेंस बहुत रिस्पॉन्सिबली उसने एविडेंस दिए हैं. उसमें ये आखिर में आज़ाद सिर्फ जॉब्स और एजुकेशन में रिजर्वेशन के लिए एग्री कर गए थे कॉन्स्टिट्यूएंट असेंबली डिबेट के इंटरवेंशन में, उसमें भी वो आउट हो गए. अदरवाइज इवन पार्लियामेंट में भी कॉन्स्टिट्यूएंट असेंबली डिबेट में तो वो साइलेंट रही मोस्टली, पार्लियामेंट में भी वो पूरे 1 साल तक खामोश रहे. और उनकी मौत के बाद जो ट्रिब्यूटरी वॉल्यूम आया है, उस वॉल्यूम में भी इसको ये चीज़ें लाई गई हैं. इसमें अभी भी मुशीरुल हक की 53 साल पहले छपी थी किताब, और उससे एडिक्वेटली इंगेज नहीं किया गया है. मुशीरुल हक की किताब से ये पूरी बात समझ में ज़्यादा अच्छी तरह आती है, और ही इज़ वेरी क्रिटिकल अगेंस्ट आज़ाद, बट ही आर्टिकुलेट्स इट इन अ वेरी पोलाइट वे, in a very persuasive way, and he doesn't say anything without evidence. उसमें वो बताते हैं कि आज़ाद अपने खुद को लीडर ऑफ द मुस्लिम्स, मोस्ट इम्पॉर्टेंट लीडर ऑफ द मुस्लिम्स बनाने के लिए उन्होंने बहुत सारे ट्रिक्स चले थे, जिसमें उनकी ज़िंदगी में ही उनके फैमिली के प्राइड के बारे में और बहुत सारे उनकी तालीम के बारे में, या जिन तालीमी इदारों से उनका ताल्लुक़ था नहीं था, इन सारे मामलात पर उनके बारे में जो लिखा गया वो फैक्चुअली इनकरेक्ट था, और वो कुछ बोल नहीं रहे थे. मुशीरुल हक का ये कहना है कि वो जानबूझ के ये नहीं बोल रहे थे, और ये अगर उसको ओन अप कर लेते तो फिर ये लीडर नहीं बन पाते. इसलिए यहाँ तक कि वो अल अज़हर से नहीं पढ़े हैं, ये बात 1940 की किताब में लिखी गई, 1946 की किताब में लिखी गई, और वो चुप रहे. उनकी मौत 1958 में हुई है. कि अगर ये اون اپ کر لیتے کہ وہ الازہر سے نہیں پڑھیں تو پھر علماء ان کو مانتے نہیں. ان کا اسکیمز بھی ان کا فیل کیا ہے. جیسے وہ دارالارشاد انہوں نے بنایا کلکتہ میں کہ خاص قسم کا وہ تیار کریں گے کاڈر وہ تیار نہیں کر پائے, وہ 2 ہی سال میں بند ہو گیا. پھر ان کا امام ہند کا اسکیم بھی فلاپ رہا. یہ اور بات ہے کہ اس اسکیم سے جوریڈیکل گھیٹو ہی تیار ہوتا تو وہ بھی فیل کیا. صرف بہار میں وہ سکسیسفل رہا شریعہ کورٹ کا اسکیم کسی حد تک جو اٹ کیم انٹو بینگ. تو مشیر الحق نے یہ صاف طور پر کہا ہے کہ انہوں نے ایک امیجری تیار کی ہے کہ ایک ٹرین ہے اور اس ٹرین میں بیٹھ گئے ہیں اور ایک جو لیڈر ہیں وہ اپر برتھ پہ بیٹھے ہوئے ہیں. کسی اسٹیشن پر آ کے وہ پوچھ رہے ہیں کہ یہ ٹرین دلی کب پہنچے گی. تو باقی پیسنجرز کہہ رہے ہیں کہ ہم تو لاہور جا رہے ہیں, ٹرین تو لاہور جا رہی ہے. ارے میں تو دلی کے لیے بیٹھا تھا. تو ابھی میں ختم کر دیتا ہوں. تو میں تو دلی کے لیے بیٹھا تھا. تو چلیے اللہ مالک ہے, جن کو لاہور جانا ہے لاہور پہنچا دیں گے اللہ میاں, اور جن کو دلی جانا ہے وہ دلی پہنچا دیں گے. تو یہاں سے وہ شروع کرتے ہیں, ختم کرتے ہیں مشیر الحق یہ کہہ کے کہ مولانا آزاد نے سب کو ایک ٹرین میں بٹھا لیا. بٹھانے کے بعد تب وہ چیک کر رہے تھے ٹکٹ کی کہاں کا ہے, تو وہ تب ہو نہیں سکتا تھا, وہ یہی حالت ہو گئی ہوئی تھی. تو ان کا یہ کہنا ہے کہ مولانا آزاد کے مقابلے جنہ یا 2 نیشن تھیوری ان کے ریزسٹنس کے باوجود سکسیسفل ہوئی. اس کی ایک بڑی وجہ اپارٹ فرام برٹش سپورٹ ٹو مسلم کمیونل سیپریٹزم یا یہ کہ کمپٹیٹیو کمیونلزم نے کرایا, وہ سب اپنی جگہ, وہ سارے فیکٹرز ہیں. وہ اس وجہ سے ہے کہ آپ پولیٹیکل یہ مانگ ہی نہیں رہے تھے, آپ صرف کلچرل سیف گارڈ کی بات کر رہے تھے, جوریڈیکل گھیٹو تیار کر رہے تھے. جب جنہ آ گیا, مسلم لیگ جب مضبوط ہو گئی, تو نیریٹو میکنگ کلاس آف مسلمز کو یہ لگا کہ سیکولر انڈیا میں وہ نہیں ہو پائے گا جو ہم چاہ رہے ہیں, وہ تو جنہ کے پاکستان میں ہی ہو پائے گا. اور اس لیے وہ سکسیسفل رہا اور اس لیے ان کی یہ پالیٹکس فیلڈ رہی. اب اس وجہ سے آزاد کی لیڈرشپ جو ہے ناکام رہی اور 2 نیشن تھیوری کامیاب کروا دی گئی برٹش سپورٹ سے مسلم کے نیریٹو میکنگ کلاس میں. اتنے ہی پہ بات ختم کرتا ہوں کیونکہ
I think I very broadly disagree with most of the things you have raised, and Mashir al-Haq, he had his own idea of India, his own disagreements with Azad, and one may agree with him on many things. I have agreed with him on several things. I have put it in the book also. But there are lots of things which are so personal. The way he writes, there's so much bitterness. I don't know why, because he's not even a competitor with Maulana Azad. Why he's writing in that sort of spirit? Second, one should realize that Maulana Azad is not preparing a career for himself. Where is it seen that he is actually building a career? I don't know. At least I haven't come across anywhere, but he's trying to promote himself. And comparing his leadership with Jinnah is absolutely like it's a crime. How can you say that? Like Jinnah was someone who has given up on Indian politics, went to England, the Muslim Leaguers brought him back in 1930s, and was disenchanted with, first of all, he had nothing to do with Islam, which we all know. He wanted Islam to be used as a communal tool, which he did very successfully. Second, I don't agree with people who say that Maulana Azad failed in his project. Of course, India was divided, but see how many people decided to stay back in India. Who convinced them to stay back and decide India as their home? Like people in Western Uttar Pradesh, where I come from. Today, the Western Uttar Pradesh has a population of 26% Muslims. The whole of Uttar Pradesh has 19%. Despite Punjab's proximity and violence all around, it was Darul Uloom, Maulana Hussain Ahmad Madani, who was a collaborator of Azad, who was a supporter of Azad, who was able to convince the so-called Pasmanda Muslims, we call them today, the Ansaris. And I have tested it with lots of my Ansari friends. Their families are not divided. Not a single parivar is divided. They never felt the need to go to Pakistan and meet like we Sajjads do, all the time. You will hardly find a Sayyid family not divided. So this is a decision which a large number of people took, mostly Muslims from this part of India, and they were all under the spell of the leadership of Maulana Azad, not Jinnah and Muslim League at all. Then look at Allah Baksh Samru. What do you talk about him? You know, why Mashirullah not talking about him? He, in 1940, he organized Azad Muslim Conference in Delhi, where 75,000 to 1 lakh Muslims participated against the Pakistan resolution passed by Muslim League. You know, they were all Muslims. And Allah Baksh Samru was assassinated later on, and people implicate Muslim League in his death. So this is something which was all in a moment, conference, era, group, there's a large number of them. They were all collaborators of the politics of Maulana Azad. So it's not that
and
it's
still,
not such a simplistic way of to rubbish what Maulana Azad did. You know, I don't know.
So next you can.
My question remains unanswered as to why did he remain silent on in
This
Constituent
silence,
Assembly debates?
I think you need to go to the multiple volume set by Rajendra Kumar and look at the participation of Maulana Azad there in Constituent Assembly.
I have gone through that. He abstained from many debates, not only in Constituent Assembly, in Parliament also. For the whole year of 1955, he was silent. He remained silent even when the massacre of Muslims in Hyderabad was being discussed, and he persuaded Muslims not to raise such issues. These are evident there. So my question remains with your book. When you disagreed so much with Mushirul Haq, why did not you engage in an informed way, in a comprehensive way with that book? The engagement is not there, and so is the case with previous biographies. Why did not you engage with that? One may disagree, one must disagree with Mushirul Haq as well, but there is no engagement.
Maybe in the next book.
No, thank you. Thank you very much.
And also, you are more familiar with the making of the book by Rizwan Kaisar on Maulana Azad. And he has clearly brought it out how helpless as president he was. President of the Congress from 1940 to 1946. Things had gone in a very different way, and these researchers must come out. Zakir Hussain, as Vice Chancellor of Aligarh Muslim University, is writing to Rajendra Prasad after independence for enhancing the grant of AMU. He is not writing to the Education Minister. And perhaps they were not on talking terms. The two were not on talking terms. Zakir Hussain and Maulana Azad. So much so that Khaliq Ahmad Nizami happened to have visited Maulana Azad, the historian Khaliq Ahmad Nizami, and then he came to Zakir Hussain and he said, Maulana wants to meet you. So with holding back his bitterness, he said, Maulana से कह दीजिएगा कि इस इलाके से, यानी जो जामिया का जो इलाका है, इस इलाके से मौलाना के घर की जितनी दूरी है उतनी ही दूरी मौलाना के घर से हमारे इलाके की है, यानी वो भी आ सकते हैं. तो
Sir, I disagree with you what sir said, that you compared him with Jinnah, who was responsible for massacre for lakhs of people in the direct action day. How can you
I didn't compare. There is
with a traitor?
Have you completed your question? I didn't compare. I simply said that politics of partition.
This number one. Number two, my humble submission to all of who are present here, when you are discussing a personality, criticizing a personality is a good thing, but please focus on good points too. You said that he failed as a president of Congress, But why don't you highlight this, that he was the youngest president of the Congress in 1935?
No.
This
This is not
has
the way
been
of
discussed.
research.
This
is
has
not
been
the way of
discussed.
research. This is not the way of research. If you have person, anybody, either
Have you
it is
completed
Gandhi-
your question?
Yes, he will answer the question.
No, my question is not complete. Sir, it is not about research. What I am feeling bad is you are discussing a personality here. So, okay, criticism is welcome. We, as individuals, we have different perspectives. But when you are celebrating a person here, we are here to, look on his work, on his life, what he did. Then, I don't know. I disagree with
You
what you
completed your
said.
question.
Yeah.
Many aspects have been discussed yesterday as well. Today-
Yesterday I
to-
missed.
to-
I am
to-
very sorry.
That is why you are raising this question. So far as your first substantive question, I didn't compare the two. I simply said that the politics of partition succeeded and politics against partition failed for many reasons. There were many reasons. One of the reasons I underlined here. Rest of the reasons I didn't underline. I simply hinted and in a passing way because that was not required here. So this is not a comparison at all. If at all you or any one present here would call it a comparison, then it was either a communication gap on my part that I could not convey it that way, or there was a problem in comprehension. This was not a comparison at all. It was simply to say that politics of partition prevailed for many reasons, including and the most important reason were two: that there was competitive communalism, and that was abated and prodded by the British rule. The state power was with the British rule. So I think this much, having said, had become clear enough.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's just one intervention. You know, Maulana Azad was thoroughly a gentleman, and he was leading the entire group very gently. You know, there was a kind of sophistication and a highly learned man, in fact. You see, in so many areas, in fact. And he had understood the situation also, you see, in and around. But you know what is happening here in India? At times, when you take up the matter, issues in a very, very, powerful manner, in the sense that if you really take a position, extreme position, in fact, because Jinnah was almost, you see, taking extreme position. Two nation theory was, extreme position. In fact, dividing India into two, it's not simple, But what is happening in Indian society? Indian society is almost, a silent society. When Gandhiji started campaign, in his first visit, you see, he couldn't understand what was around India. And then Gokhale, inviting him. Gokhale himself went to Durban, you see, where he was leading Satyagraha, you see, Gandhiji. And then he invited Gandhi to come and study Indian situation. First, you see, he never said that you join Congress and then you start your campaign and then come to the politics. You see, rather, study. And unfortunately, Gokhale also died very soon. In 1915 only, you see, he died. And Gandhi was highly perturbed, you see, with his death because he was a mentor. So what is happening? Then Gandhi started saying, Gandhi opposed home rule because home rule changing seats, from one side to another side, he was against it. But later on, what happened is Maulana Azad joining and meeting Gandhi. Again, many people coming to the fold of Gandhiji, because even Rabindranath Tagore. After that, when they almost, in 1917, there was no home rule, there was no campaign. Even Tilak was not here. In fact, Annie Besant was leading, and therefore, Gandhi's campaign and discarding home rule, this was not really appreciated. It could have been a very powerful weapon, you see, for the entire. But this was led by elites, in fact. So therefore, So all these things happening, and Maulana Azad was also trying to read the, entire psychology of our Muslim society. He's, different societies, different languages, you see. And he was also studying. When Gandhi was studying India, he was also trying to, grasp the entire situation. Ultimately, you see, combination of these two in 1920, I think, you see, first, you see, they met and they discussed, and they're coming to one single platform, in fact. But it was, an approach where, you have to adopt a middle path. It's not extreme way. Maulana Azad was not, so vibrant that look, I mean, either this or this. I mean, he was not like that. You see, like Jinnah. And as you mentioned, you see, it is very true. To what extent Jinnah was a Muslim? Muslim League and other things. He was a brilliant hypocrite. So therefore, but Maulana Azad was a very, very, enlightened and well-read person and understanding the situation. He opposed to nation theory, but Gandhiji himself couldn't support him. He was, a broken man. And then he starts another campaign that, okay, I'm for this nation, no Hindu, no Muslim, and a good combination. Let us come out with this. He tried his level best, but his hands were also tight. I mean, don't say that he was so much Azad that he could do anything, But to say that Sajjad Sahab, if you say a middle path is always dangerous in India. What happened to Buddhism? Samyak Drishti, Samyak Vyayam, Samyak Sankalp. What Samyak? Samyak is nothing here, either here or there. Even today, you see the situation, either here or there. Nothing like middle. Middle one is not successful in India, I'm sorry to say.
Okay, thank you, Sajjad. I agree with you because there should be a disagreement with any. We are not here to read a qasida in favor of Maulana Azad. This is academic gathering. Just listen. This is academic gathering. This is not. We are not here to read qasida. Anybody, any political leader is subject to criticism. And this is the one way of criticism. That was the reason why Professor Irfan Habib has not disagreed with him and he contested that theory. That is the research. It's not that we are not here to read a qasida. So if this is a academic gathering, everybody has a right. Thank you. Thank you, Sajjad. I now invite Amir. Please come and.
This paper should be in the last one. I now have the unenviable task of continuing.
There's a list for everything.
No, I'm just kind of reflecting on my difficulty. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure being here on the second day. Let me begin. I'm reversing everything that I thought I would say. Let me just try to address the concerns. So let me begin from this point about the ineffectiveness of Azad that Sajjad Bhai was trying to. I'm completely going off script. This is not what I had intended to say. I need to address this. Let me try to talk about why Azad was ineffective. He was ineffective. But perhaps that is the tragedy of any scholar's politician. I'll begin from something I was reading in the morning. So many of you may have come across the story. Aaj ke khabar hai ye. A teacher in a teaching, what is that? Coaching institute mein, had put out a post saying only elect educated leaders. The man has lost his job. It's a story you would have read today. The man has lost his job. Now, what does that tell you? It tells you the story of specifically Indian politics. जो सबसे कमतर पढ़े लिखे हैं वो सबसे कामयाब सियासी एतबार से होंगे जो सबसे पढ़े लिखे हैं सबसे नाकाम होंगे. Now my point is the tragedy of Azad perhaps flows from his being a scholar who has the tragic fate of getting into the rough and tumble of politics. Now the reason why I say this is in 1937 a Plato scholar called R.H.S. Crossman wrote a book called Plato Today. Okay, I'm a great enthusiast of Plato. I talk a lot about Plato. Now, what was R.H.S. Crossman arguing almost 100 years ago? He said that if you think about Plato today, the idea of Plato's philosopher ruler, which is a pretty bad idea, translates into the tragedy of the university academic becoming condemned to getting into the rough and tumble of the political. So the scholar outside his study, his library, his university campus, or wherever he feels comfortable, finding himself in the rough and tumble of politics, and real politics as we call it, is like a duck out of water. And I think this was perhaps the tragedy of Azad. Now, I had not intended to say this, so let me get back to the title of my talk. In the 15 minutes, hopefully, that have been allotted to me, I will try to explain and unpack the terms that I have used in my title. I call it the loneliness of Azad: politics, scholarship, and friendship. Now, why do I call it loneliness? Because every single photograph of Azad that I have seen has this visage of extreme seriousness, of a moroseness, of a melancholia, of a sadness, which I think reflects the unfolding tragedy of Azad in public life. Somewhere in Gobara Khatir, he does say, "Siyasat ka piche maine nahi kiya tha, siyasat mere piche aayegi." And I think I would largely agree with that line, because this is what I call in the beginning of, as I began my prefatory remarks, this is the tragedy of the scholar politician. To be condemned to the kind of rough and tumble. And most people who have tried to make this impossible transition from the serene solitude of their study to the rough and tumble of the political are likely to face the fate that Azad experienced and what befell him. Again, let me come back to the point about loneliness. The idea of loneliness came to me as I was going through Gobara Khatir, a book that was first introduced to me by my grandfather in his study, a tattered copy that I still have. And I was impressed by the lyrical nature of the prose. It is one of the finest examples of epistolary writing that I have come across, not that I have read much of epistolary writing. But the fact that this great classic was written in Ahmednagar Fort prison, along with other prisoners, most probably being Nehru. Now, in one of the letters, incidentally written on the 15th of August, 1942, before the 15th of August became the red letter day that it has become for us, in terms of India's independence, that was, of course, said by Louis Mountbatten. Azad says, जैसे वो कहते हैं गुबार खातिर में सुबह का 4 बज रहा है, सुबह सवेरे उठ रहे हैं, चाय उनकी तैयार है, उसके बाद वो जो एक वक्त अकेलापन का होता है, और नेहरू के बारे में कहते हैं कि एक लकड़ी की जाली के उधर नेहरू सो रहे हैं, हल्के से खराटे ले रहे हैं और अंग्रेजी में बड़बड़ा रहे हैं. ओके, और वो कहते हैं कि जवाहर जब बड़बड़ाते हैं नींद में तो अंग्रेजी में बड़बड़ाते हैं, which tells you something about the way that Nehru would think. Now, my point is that there was a particular kind of friendship between Nehru and Azad. The last term in my title is friendship. I'm not just picking up this term from anywhere. We were talking about, Sean is my student, and many years ago I was teaching, I still teach that course. So in Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, the last 2 books, not the last 2, but books 8 and 9, are on the question of friendship. Okay, friendship in politics. Friendship has profound effect on politics. Now, there are 2 kinds of friendship that Aristotle talks about. One is a friendship of virtue, where 2 people come together because there's a certain kind of intellectual like-mindedness. You can find that kind of friendship in Azad and Nehru. It's there. Ek aur dosti aajkal aapko milegi, which also Aristotle talks about. I leave it to your imagination to decide which kind of friendship I'm referring to. But this is a friendship of instrumentality. Now, the point that Aristotle is making is, in the Nicomachean Ethics, which is a great book to read, it's been read across the Muslim world by many, many Muslim philosophers. Aristotle is a hugely influential philosopher. The point that Aristotle is making is that a friendship of virtue leads to a civic accord, a politics of concord, of a coming together, of the ability to resolve the strife of the political. A politics of instrumentality can only lead to civil strife. And I think it's important to be able to look at this aspect of Azad, because what I'm trying to now suggest is, in the rest of the time that I have left with me, is that even that politics, even that friendship failed Azad. Something that I have felt people don't talk about is the controversy that arose in the late 1980s, when 30 years after Azad's death, the 30 pages of his autobiography India Wins Freedom were released, where he had very, very nasty things to say about his old friend Nehru and Patel and Gandhi. Because essentially what is he saying? He's saying, I had a dream, a bit like Martin Luther King's dream. I had a dream that India would not be partitioned. And it could have been prevented. It wasn't prevented because of the egoism of certain political leaders who were his political associates. Now, Azad is clearly a very broken man when he writes this. Now, I still remember by that time I was, of course, very young. I would have been, 14 at the most, 15 when in the late 80s when all this was happening. But I will never forget what the India Today wrote at that time. Dilip Bob, I think, the memory comes back to me. Dilip Bob said, well, you can agree or disagree with Azad. But the point is, here is a freedom fighter par excellence, who is completely broken by what befell the country that he tried to, shall you talk about meaning, what is the making, world making, right? So the whole idea of world, the world that he wanted to make was a world ensconced in an undivided India. Now that really, that troubled him. So what I'm trying to really push, kind of for a further discussion, hopefully, is the idea that Azad was condemned to the tragic fate that befell him. It was like a Greek tragedy. What happens in a Greek tragedy? You have someone, the protagonist, who has many, many, many advantages and virtues, and there's this one fatal flaw. And the one fatal flaw proves to be the tragic unfolding. Now, in Azad's case, of course, there was many virtues, and of course, people have stressed that it's important to, stress the virtues of Azad. Of course, there were many virtues. He was one of the tallest statesmen of India, one of the most educated of political leaders. But if one thinks about Azad, perhaps the tragedy of our times is the fact that Azad, someone like Azad, can never politically succeed. It tells us something about our politics. It tells us something about the way we conceptualize and conceive of politics. Every time I talk to my students about this book, Nicomachean Ethics, from which I've drawn this distinction about a politics of virtue and a friendship of virtue and a friendship of instrumentality, one leading towards civic concord, the other leading towards civic strife. I also go back to the beginning of Nicomachean Ethics. The point that Aristotle makes there is that, famously, everyone perhaps knows this, anyone who's done political science, is that politics is a master science. Why does he say this? He says that politics incorporates or encompasses the ends of every single other activity jo samaj mein ho rahi hai. And therefore, what it tells me is that the politics that we have given to ourselves in the 20th century is a politics of extremely narrow, mean-minded means towards certain ends, which are certainly not noble. And therefore, the larger point that I want to put across in terms of trying to understand Azad, and especially the point that Shauna you were making yesterday about, sorry, was it something you used again? World making, which is, I found an extremely attractive idea. That in this world making, it would be entirely impossible to create the world in the way that we want to if we are driven by a certain kind of hard-nosed realpolitik, as we call it. What I'm trying to submit, especially after Sajjad has paper, is that in the light of this hard-nosed realpolitik, someone like Azad can only fail. The young man who made that point about electing educated leaders will lose his job. And it is time, especially in universities like this, to think about where politics is going, because there are possibilities in the political. A point that Aristotle keeps making. What is the political after all? The political is the ability of people to collectively sit together and decide what kind of life we want to have, what kind of world we want to make. And this is precisely what is prevented from us being able to kind of decide for ourselves. And therefore, as a political scientist, someone who's been teaching political science for 19 years now in a Badnam-e-Zamana University, Jawaharlal Nehru University, I go back to this point. There is much to learn from Azad. There is much, much to learn from him. Perhaps the biggest lesson to be learned is the tragic fate that befell Azad for the simple reason that he was someone who could never adjust himself to the hard-nosed world of realpolitik. I'll stop there to save up on time for discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you for completing your getting. Thank you very much. And I think comment is needed.
It is unfair for someone sitting on the dais to speak, but I would take just less than a minute. Please. Even Mushir admits it, and he ends his book on that paragraph.
On this one.
He quotes Muhammad Mujib, he quotes Humayun Kabir, and both of them understood the loneliness of Azad. And the book, which created so much of controversy here, as I mentioned it, the book ends with that paragraph of Muhammad Mujib, the loneliness of Azad, which they emphasize. Humayun Kabir also talks a lot about this. So this is the way this is.
You see, this is, somebody asked Gandhi once that why you use Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali as Muslim leaders and not really Azad, because many times Muhammad Ali, Shaukat Ali were actually in the forefront when representing Muslims, and he was told that they are rebel rousers. Why use them? So Gandhi said, you go and ask Azad. Maulana Azad is not ready to sit even in the front on the dais. We have to pull him in the front. He always goes and sits at the back. So he was a man who always wanted to remain almost shy of the crowd, etc. He was in public life, but he was not actually a man to be in public. He was a man who loved his solitude. And in Ghubare-e-Khatir, he has written it several times that he gets up early morning at 3:34 to work, because that is a time when the whole world sleeps and I am awake and I can really think and write what I want to.
Any question from audience side, please? Wait.
सर मैं ये जानना चाह रहा था कि कहीं ना कहीं जैसे लोनलीनेस की आपने बात की, तो एक बार ऐसा लगता है कि मौलाना आज़ाद कहीं उनमें एक अनानियत थी कि वो अपने आप किसी के सामने नहीं जाते थे जब तक कोई उनसे ना मिले, ये सारी चीज़ें। दूसरी बात सर, अल हिलाल में उनके साथ थे मौलाना सैयद सुलेमान नदवी साहब, उनका कहीं जिक्र नहीं आता है। जब भी बात होती है अल हिलाल की तो सिर्फ मौलाना आज़ाद पे आके रुक जाती है, जबकि वो एडिटोरियल में थे उसके। इस पे मैं चाहूंगा कुछ थोड़ा सा कमेंट आप करें।
देखिए एक जनरल पॉइंट रखूंगा, वो ये है कि जो ब्रॉड आर्ग्यूमेंट मेरे इसका 10 मिनट का जो था कि वो ये है कि सियासत जो है एक इज्तिमाई एक्टिविटी है, उसमें इसको हम कहते हैं एक कलेक्टिव है। इसके एसेंस, सियासत के एसेंस, अगर एसेंस का मतलब है एक ऐसी चीज जो उसको हटा ले तो वो चीज वो नहीं रहती है, वो एंटिटी वो नहीं रहती है। तो सियासत एक एसेंशियली कलेक्टिव एक्टिविटी है। मौलाना आजाद की शख्सियत अजीब व गरीब है कि वो उस कलेक्टिविटी में वो नहीं शामिल हो पाते हैं, और जब इस तरह के इंसान को पॉलिटिक्स के जो वर्ल्ड पूल में खींच लिया जाता है तो वो हालत होती है जो हमने देखा आजाद का हुआ। Now, ये लंबी बहस होगी, शायद हम लोगों के पास इतना वक्त नहीं है कि डिलिबरेटली आजाद ने इमाम अल हिंद बनने का एक इगोइस्टिक डिजायर नर्चर किया अपने अंदर। हो सकता है ये हर शख्स के अंदर होता है कि अपने आप को इस तरह प्रोजेक्ट करना। उसके प्रोजेक्ट करने का तरीका कैसा हुआ, वो सियासी एतबार से वो हमने देखा नाकाम हो गया। Perhaps एक दूसरा सेमिनार अगर ऑर्गेनाइज हो तो इस पर हम लोग इस पर गौर, जो आप ये बात उठा रहे हैं क्या, जिसको हम लोग कहते हैं ना आजकल सेल्फ प्रोजेक्शन कहते हैं, तो ये तो सियासत का बहुत अहम हिस्सा हो गया है कि एक सेल्फ प्रोजेक्शन कहते हैं। That's all I can say right now.
सैयद सुलेमान नदवी साहब का जिक्र नहीं आया सर, वो उनके साथ थे। अल हिलाल पे सिर्फ मौलाना आजाद का एक ठप्पा लग जाता है।
इनके पास से जवाब।
आपका सवाल अहम है, यही परेशानी है जो इन्होंने इसका हमारे जवाब दे दिया है। इत्मीनान बख्श जवाब होना चाहिए वो आपके लिए कि आप जब पॉलिटिक्स कर रहे हैं तो वो एक इज्तिमाई पॉलिटिक्स का जो वोकेशन है वो इज्तिमाई सरगर्मी चाहता है, जो अभी डॉक्टर आमिर अली साहब ने आपको बताया। और ये कनेक्ट हो ही नहीं रहे थे, अकेले कहीं बैठे रहते थे। तो उनकी अनानियत से, मतलब यहाँ पे फैंस भी होंगे, आज़ाद के होने भी चाहिए, लेकिन उनके अंदर जो अनानियत जो पाई जाती थी उसका وہ اعتراف کرنا پڑے گا کیونکہ وہ سچ ہے. تو جب آپ سیاسی اجتماعی سرگرمی میں تھے تو آپ کو لوگوں سے ملنا ہوگا. یہ الگ بات ہے کہ جو کنٹری کو ڈیوائڈ کروانے میں سکسیسفل ہو گیا وہ بھی کتنا ایروگینٹ تھا وہ بھی پتا ہے, اور وہ کتنا کنیکٹ ہوتا تھا وہ بھی پتا ہے, اور وہ جتنا ایروگینس سے ڈسمس کیا, جیسے جتنا جو ٹو نیشن تھیوری کا کرٹیک ہم نے نام بھی لیا تھا, جو لوگ لائے, کھلا خط لکھ رہے ہیں مولانا ابو المحسن محمد سجاد کے جنہ بتائیے کہ مسلم مائنورٹی پروونسز کے مسلم کہاں جائیں گے, آپ اپنا پاکستان لے لیں گے تو ان کا کیا ہوگا. وہ کوئی جواب نہیں دے رہا ہے. وہ آدمی مطلب وہ ایروگنٹ آدمی بھی سکسیسفل ہو گیا کیونکہ کلونیل پاور کا سپورٹ تھا, کیا تم ایک لے لو, اس کے بعد اس کو کمپنسیٹ کر دیا, 1 سال بعد فلسطین لے کے اسرائیل کو دے دیا. تو یہ بہت ساری پالیٹکس ہے اس میں. جو پالیٹکس میں ہے اس کو ماس کے ساتھ کنیکٹ ہونا پڑے گا. جو نہ رہ کے بھی جو کامیاب ہوا وہ الگ بات ہے, وہ ایک ایکسیپشن ہو سکتا ہے, لیکن اس کو ہمیں ایڈمٹ کرنا ہوگا.
اسی لیے سر کل بات ہو رہی تھی عرفان سر سے, اور میں انہیں بھی یہی کہہ رہا تھا کہ جنہ جو ہے ایک طرح سے اپنے آپ کو ماس لیڈر اسٹیبلش کرانے میں کامیاب ہو گیا, جبکہ مولانا آزاد اس طرح سے کامیاب نہیں ہوئے کہ لوگ ان کے پیچھے جڑ جائیں.
نہیں, مجھے نہیں لگتا ہے کہ یہ اس میں کوئی کسی طرح کا, مولانا آزاد کے کتنا بھی پرائیویٹ پرسن ہو, کتنا بھی سولیٹیوڈ چاہنے والے ہوں, لیکن مولانا آزاد پبلک لائف میں رہے. پہلی بات تو یہ آپ کو ہم سب کو خیال ہونا چاہیے کہ مولانا آزاد سولو پلیئر نہیں ہے پالیٹکس میں. اس وقت کی پالیٹکس بڑی کمپلیکس ہے, اس میں یہ ملٹی اسٹارر ہے. جیسے فلمیں آتی ہیں نا, اس میں بڑے بڑے نام امیتابھ بچن اور ہے نا, تو وہ ایک سنگل ایکٹر یا ایکٹریس کی فلم نہیں تھی. اس میں بہت سارے پلیئرس ہیں, الگ الگ سوچ کے لوگ تھے, الگ الگ مذہب کے لوگ تھے, الگ الگ قوموں کے لوگ تھے, الگ الگ جاتیوں کے لوگ تھے. تو اس میں بہت سارے ایشوز تھے جو اس پورے ہمارے آزادی کے جو تحریک ہے اس کو کمپلیکس بناتا ہے. تو آج ہم, کیونکہ مولانا آزاد ایک ایسی فگر ہے کہ ہم ان کو اس سے پورے جو کمپلیکس ہے اس سے الگ ہٹا کے ان کو ہم سمجھنے کی کوشش کر رہے ہیں. مولانا آزاد جو بھی کچھ کر رہے تھے وہ اس پوری سیاست کا حصہ تھے. اس کی کمیاں, اس کی اسٹرینتھ, اس سے انہوں نے فائدہ ان کو پہنچا, کہیں ان کو نقصان بھی ہوا. کچھ ان کی اپنی پرسنالٹی کے ٹریٹس ہے جس کا اثر نیگیٹو پازیٹیو ہوا. تو اس لیے یہ بہت آسان چیز نہیں ہے کہ اس پر ہم آج ریٹروسپیکٹیولی کمنٹ کریں کہ بھائی, پہلی بات میں ہسٹری پڑھنے میں یا لکھنے میں اس ہسٹری میں بلیو کرتا ہوں جو کانٹیکسٹ اسپیسیفک ہو. کانٹیکسٹ سے ہٹا کے میں اس اتہاس کو پڑھنا نہیں چاہتا ہوں. آپ اگر گاندھی کو پڑھ رہے ہیں یا نہرو کو پڑھ رہے ہیں, سمجھنے کی کوشش کر رہے ہیں, اس پیریڈ میں اپنے آپ کو رکھ کے دیکھیے. 2023 میں بیٹھ کے آپ بہت کمفرٹیبلی اس پر نہیں کہہ سکتے, نہ کہنا چاہیے. آپ زیادتی کر رہے ہیں ان لوگوں کے ساتھ, کیونکہ وہ ایک دوسری دنیا میں تھے, وہ دنیا الگ تھی. مولانا آزاد اس ماحول میں تھے جب زہر پھیلا ہوا تھا پارٹیشن کے بعد, فرقہ پرستی کا زہر. مولانا آزاد بول بھی نہیں سکتے تھے آزادی سے. بہت جگہ انہوں نے لکھا ہے, ہم کہتے ہیں نا وہ مولانا نے کیوں نہیں بولا, اس پر کیوں نہیں بولا. بھائی پارٹیشن کے بعد آپ کو مرہم لگانا تھا, بہت سی چیزیں ایسی تھی جن پر آپ کو چپ رہنا تھا, پبلک اسپیس سے آپ کو پیچھے رہنا تھا, اور وہ مولانا آزاد کو کرنا پڑا, مجبوری تھی. افسوس کی بات ہے کہ یہ کرنا پڑا, لیکن ایسا ہوا. تو آج ہم اس سب کو بھول جاتے ہیں.
عرفان صاحب نے کنٹیکسٹ کی بات کی, میں ذرا کنٹیکسٹ سے ہٹ کے ہی بولنا چاہوں گی. انانیت کا ایک لفظ آیا ابھی نہیں, ان کا جو ایک خط ہے انانیت پہ, اس کو پڑھیں تو یو سی دیٹ انانیت ان کے ذہن میں ایک سبلیمیٹڈ انانیت ہے. اس انانیت کو جنہ کے ایگو سے ہم کہیں تک بھی نہیں دے سکتے. That is a self-serving ego, whereas this is a sublimated ego. I think that should explain his aloneness or
loneliness.
Whatever. I won't call it loneliness. I will call it aloneness.
Aloneness.
He was apart.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amir. It's very enlightening. I'll give my comment later on. First, now I request Dr. Shana to come and present your paper.
Thank you to everyone for having me here, and I'm learning a lot from this discussion. I too have some responses to the debate that we are having, but I'll come to it at the end of my comment, because I think I want to reflect a little bit on the book itself, because I've read it very closely, and I would encourage everyone here to read it very closely. I think when one is writing a book on Azad, there are several difficulties that one encounters. He wrote in multiple languages, and he used extremely heavy vocabulary. And he occupied so many different positions across different worlds, worlds where people understood their context very differently. And I think one thing that is truly remarkable about this book is that it reconstructs these overlapping worlds that Azad lived in with care and lends it details that a diverse readership can truly learn from. So, I found the detail about the anti-Wahhabism of his father Khairuddin particularly relevant. The influence of Sir Syed and Jamal al-Din Afghani on Azad's theological thought as well as anti-imperialism, deeply helpful. And the book is written by showing the emergence of Hindu nationalism while Azad is active in politics. And it shows that Azad produced several responses to this emergence of Hindu nationalism, which can be relevant to contemporary India. And for that, I think there is something truly commendable here in this book. I think the second thing that it does is it produces details on young Azad, which today have, until today have not been available, at least in the English language. And so we have a very detailed first chapter on Azad, the early influences on how he built, what the VC was saying, this virtue of moderation, a virtue which Aristotle always emphasized very heavily as the most important virtue in politics. And what I found most interesting was Azad's reading French. Many people talk about how Azad was a multilingualist, but very few people talk about the fact that he went to Paris and he learned French and he read Rousseau very, very closely. So, of course, he was deeply influenced by the Greeks via Islamic traditions of Falsafa and Kalam. But the fact that he read, theories of direct democracy would later contribute to how he would become the first Minister of Education. And I'll come to that in a few minutes. I think the third important thing that this book does is it addresses a gap in scholarship around Azad's approach towards science. Here was the first education minister of India who was a deeply Islamic thinker, but he set up engineering institutions that everyone claims are world-class. And there is proof to that because today, all the big technological companies in the world are run by Indians from IIT, no matter how narrow-minded they are. They learned in institutions that were set up by Maulana Azad. And I think throughout the text, there is an emphasis on the different influences that helped Azad develop an appreciation to science. The rationality that he drew from different Islamic thinkers, Jamal al-Din, Afghani's influence and appreciation for science, and the acknowledgement that at the end of the day, science is going to shape how we view the world today. So Azad, while he wrote so much that was not scientific, was able to generate a politics in India where an appreciation for science could be built via traditions that were not necessarily Western or liberal, but coming from, the Islamic world and the Indic world as well. And he does that in introductions, for example, to books on philosophy, Indian philosophy that S. Radhakrishnan wrote, etc. And I think this book points us in that direction and becomes a great resource for anyone who wants to research Azad. Now, I think what the book does is it doesn't shy away from talking about the relevance of Azad to our contemporary environment, despite being a history of Azad. And I think this is something that we can accuse historians of. I'm a political theorist, so I'm always happy to throw accusations at historians, who hesitate from taking positions about contemporary Indian politics. This book does not shy away from that, and therefore, is a book which is aware and acknowledges the context in which one is writing about Azad and why it is relevant to write about Azad. And finally, I think the book does a very good job of demonstrating how Indian nationalist historical writing has been unfair to Azad by constantly attributing what he did to Nehru. And I think this is not necessarily a problem in Azad. It's a problem in how history has been written in India as something where nationalist ideas or the idea of constructing a nation has always been credited to Nehru as opposed to anybody else. And Azad has definitely been a victim there, and I think this book addresses that problem very well. So, here is, I think, the great historical contributions of this book. Now, let me come to the second section of my comments, which is on Azad's ideas. I think first, I don't think that Azad was a failure. I think we would view him as a failure only if we view him from the particular lens of partition. And I have something to say on that, which I'll come to in a while. But I think he was a success as an anti-imperial thinker. He wrote so much on anti-imperialism. His work was not just published in India, it was published in Turkey, it was published in Egypt. People everywhere read who Azad was, read Azad's thoughts, and were able to develop connections between anti-colonialism elsewhere and anti-colonialism in India because of what Azad wrote. Maybe I'm giving him too much importance, but I think we should not ignore his contributions there. The second, I think, is, and this is where the final chapter of the book, I think, is truly commendable, is Azad's belief in democracy. I think the Muslim League, believed that democracy in India did not give Muslims the capacity to live an Islamic life or a life where Muslim interests could be pursued. But Azad believed that democracy would and could have that potential to allow Islamic ideas to flourish. We can question whether that was successful or not, but he consistently argued that democracy is a political idea that has the potential to do so. And, he develops a certain kind of comportment required for it. So he is not materialistic like Nehru was. Nehru thought that in order to have democracy, we need to have certain kind of material progress. Azad begins to emphasize other things. And I think one of the most important thing he does is emphasize education. And here is where, his engagement with Rousseau's ideas, his reading of Emile, and the importance of what it means to be educated in order to deliberate with others, in order to be able to see another person's viewpoint, and in order to gain the moral motivations that one needs in order to participate in a democracy, is something that Azad acknowledged, and this book asks us to reflect on. And finally, this book shows us how Azad thought about different ways of understanding about pluralism. I won't go into this deeply because we discussed a lot of it yesterday, but I think nobody else in India, no other political thinker engaged with it as deeply as Azad did. And it was important to Azad because it was a compulsion. He had to think about what it meant for minorities to be able to live in a society and emphasize why pluralism is important in a society. And I think we would be very dismissive of what Azad has done if we do not commend him for making that argument more than anybody else during the Indian anti-colonial movement. Now, my final part of my comment is on Azad's contribution to knowledge. I think when we are working on Azad, there has always been a pressure for the person who's working on Azad to write on everything that Azad did. But here is a man who lived a multifaceted life. He was engaged in politics very deeply. Even when he stayed silent, he was present. So he was present in most of the Constituent Assembly debates. And, the Constituent Assembly debates did not just take place in the main hall of the Constituent Assembly. It took place in subcommittee reports. It took place in many other, commissions around the Constituent Assembly debates. And Azad headed those commissions and was very much present and vocal there. I think that we can, I think we should be able to see his silence as a political move, not just a political move of betrayal, but a political move to show how partition had impacted how Muslims could participate in deliberation at that moment. We can call it the failures of Azad, but since I'm a political theorist, I can point to the failures of some of the greatest philosophers alive. Aristotle, who I think everyone in this room might acknowledge as the greatest philosopher who's ever written, defended slavery. Machiavelli wrote so much about how power should be used. Every philosopher who has shaped the modern world and whom we take seriously has had serious flaws in how they lived and engaged in politics in their contemporary moment. And therefore, I think Azad shouldn't be judged simply for what he did in separate political moments. He should be judged for his political thought and how it contributes to contemporary India. This doesn't undermine his position or his silence during partition. I think it has its relevance and place, and we should be able to criticize him for it. But I think that doesn't define Azad as a whole, as a person, as a historical figure, and most importantly, for me, as a political thinker. And so I don't think his life is a failure. I think it was a success. And if we simply view his life through what he did during partition, we would be committing, I think, the mistake of reading history in a very linear manner. Between partition and the rise of Hindu nationalism as a dominant political power in India, we have had, a few good decades of thriving pluralism in India. I don't think we should, completely undermine those decades, and draw a clear line between partition to contemporary Hindu nationalism. Unfortunately, that's not how democracy works. We can build narratives around democracy in that way, but democracy has really enabled people to move and progress in India, not just in the direction of material progress, but in, the expansion of knowledge. And this university, in many ways, is testament to that. So I will end there and congratulate Professor Habib on writing such a wonderful book. Thank you.
Any question? Please.
Thank you, and this was wonderful discussion. In fact, till now, we had contradictory discussions, and then definitely this needs a lot of debates. But this recalls me some of the informal discussion we used to have with Professor Rizwan Faisal. Faisal Sahab was very, frequent visitor and most sought speaker on Maulana Azad at MANUU. Having said that, two problems which I feel is connected to all the debate we have. One, that Muslims in India always had a dilemma when freedom is, we were about to have freedom from the entire colonialism. So the dilemma of Muslims whether to remain in India or move, which was a forced move by the leadership of Jinnah, which I feel that remained a dilemma, and that was not answered. But then dilemma that how to understand democratic governance, post-Indian India remained among Muslim community inherently, because Muslims were more carried by the legacy they lived in the past. So how do we understand that? Is it that Maulana Azad was not able to communicate properly? He was writing, and you were writing to the people who were unread, who was uneducated, who were largely illiterate, right? So in that context, how do we locate those, the differences of problem? If you read Naresh Daksina, who writes on Muslim dilemma, we feel that the dilemma remains even today. Everyone says that, like, I would not name, but there's a few political leaders say that I am the leader of the Muslim community, but Muslims never understood who should be their leader, whether it was Nehru, Gandhi, or Maulana Azad. So we started, glorifying one leader for our own sake, for our own satisfactions, but we never connected them pragmatically. And that dilemma is a problem rather than, how Maulana Azad contributed through scholarship is known to educated masses of the country, but how this get translated to the people who look for a leader who can guide the leader at the, in the field. And there is the problem that was with Zakir Hussain, Maulana Azad, and any Muslim leaders. So how do we address that? Is it also because that we see that Maulana Azad was silent, was living in loneliness, or he was more friendly with the people whom we addressed through his writings?
Thank you. This is such an interesting question. Yeah. So I think if we were to view Azad as a democrat and not as a statesman, then for him, leading the people is irrelevant because he would want the people to speak for themselves. I think if we view him as a statesman, like Nehru was, someone who was obsessed with leading people, then we would, we're in the same, we're in the same realm of comparison. We are comparing all these different thinkers. And I think, at least my perspective, is that Azad had to face a problem of thinking about how different worldviews could participate in a democracy which had already been shaped by liberalism, and I spoke about this yesterday. A democracy where liberal institutions said that if you want to come in and participate in public life, then you have to do it via particular political institutions, institutions of representation, institutions of the parliament. And Azad was not necessarily silent. He wrote so much. He wrote Al-Balag, he wrote Al-Hilal, but you're right. The people who were reading it were not, were literate people. But he also gave sermons, and he wrote fatwas, which were announced and read by, different people. But maybe he was not a mass leader. Whether that is relevant or not, I think will depend upon your dispensation. For me, I think it is not that relevant to our contemporary perspective on what it means for Azad to be able to speak to how we should tackle problems of contemporary India. I'll stop there. Yeah.
Anybody? No question from a student side? Any question? No.
No question was profound.
Now I request Danish Iqbal, Dr. Danish Iqbal, please come and deliver your speech.
Thank you, Professor Moin. A very warm good afternoon to all of you. Before I proceed, I must admit the great predilection that I'm faced with, because the past 2 days until now, the depth and scale of discussion around Azad has virtually covered all the facets to his personality and contribution, etc. I teach English at Aligarh Muslim University in the Department of English. So I would like to just lay out very briefly my interest in this program, because I'm not a historian, as some of the panelists are, nor a political scientist. Nonetheless, what has kept my interest in figures like Azad is the life of what we call modernity in history and political theory. So my entry into figure of Azad is precisely to understand that how well can we characterize Azad's relationship with modernity in India. And in order to understand that, I have read up a little bit on the scholarship which has attempted to approximate Muslim intellectuals' engagement with modernity prior to Azad's emergence on the public scene here. What I have also learned, which is to a greater degree since yesterday, and it has also partially answered my interest in this question. But at the same time, I was also wondering, having listened to the previous speakers, is whether we are speaking the language of resurrection in order to talk about someone who is already also considered a very well-established figure. And this has also kind of come at cross purposes in our approach to Azad. So I'm not going to comment on how relevant or what is the topical importance. And I'm going to very acutely be focused on why it is important to understand his or how, importance of characterizing the journey of Azad against the background of modernity. So, yesterday, Sarsia's influence on Azad was also one of the elements of discussion, which has been very well illustrated by Professor Habib. And this was also done by way of addressing that what different routes did Azad take in his thrust on pluralism. So despite his upbringing in a very different atmosphere at home under the shadow of his very revered father, Azad took a few decisions, intellectually speaking, on his own. And pursuing Sajjad for a brief while was one of them. And that made me look up how Sajjad is looked at, historically speaking. So he's widely known as this religious reformer, modernist, etc. But a professor of history at Oxford, Faisal Devji, he characterizes the Aligarh school of modernism very curiously with this provocative phrase which he employs, and he calls it an apologetic modernity. He attributes a distinct apologetic quality to the pursuit of whatever went in the name of modernity, that is reason, progress, science, learning, knowledge that has also pervaded our discussion here, enlightenment. And he calls that apologetic for the reason that the terms of the debate were being dictated from elsewhere, that is the origin of European modernity in Europe. And I quote very briefly, he says that the questions of the kind that was this language of modernity wholly or partially foreign, he asks. Was it a sign of Christian or European dominance? Was there anything neutral, universal, or Islamic about the modern? It was the questions of these kinds that characterized Muslim debates on modernity, with markers like the East and West or Islam and Christianity, which in European thought tended to define the boundaries of the modern in a peripheral and merely descriptive way. The dictated character of this debate, however, made the emergence of a systematic modernism in control of its own terms of argument impossible. So this is what he says with regards to Sajjad and other co-religionists of the time, for Muslims were neither able to participate in European discussions about their modernity, nor to be acknowledged in them, even if these discussions formed the basis of their own sense of the modern. The closeness of its thinking to European thought, together with its inability to engage with and integrate the latter intellectually, made Muslim modernism essentially apologetic. Quote close. Now here, in the same article, and how it connects to Azad for me is that later on, in the same vein, Devji goes on to remark that this apologetic character of modernity continues for much longer, where there is no getting away from the Aligarh school of modernism, even in the 20th century, although the site of this formation changes from the spirit of culture, that is Tehzeeb, Tamaddun, that you find in 19th century, to rallying around the politics of state, which has been quite clearly brought out in the figures of Azad or Jinnah in our case. So the question that I was interested in, which has also been partially addressed to yesterday, is whether Azad's relationship with modernity in terms of his engagement with the modern arrangements of governance, in terms of his call for a distinct world making, which would ensure that the distinct life worlds come together and create something which is non-instrumental, so to speak. Can we safely then presume that this was not the case with Azad, and this apologetic character of modernity is something which can only be attributed to the late 19th century Muslim intellectuals, and particularly not Azad, because the thrust that Azad placed, and I must confess that I have not read the large swath of Al-Hilal, but I have certainly gone through some of the essays, compilations, and I found that essays like Islam mein Ijtimai Nizam or Masawat ki Haqiqat, there you find that Azad is very clearly engaging with the questions which modernity throws in your face without actually addressing them by bringing alive its European origin, that is of modernity. Rather, he heads to these quote-unquote traditional texts, that is in his own reading of Quran and his own rendition of the lives of the Prophet and his companions, which I think is a glimpse into what it might look like for the reconfiguration of modernity and its allied concepts, to be in control of the terms of arguments, which, as I quoted earlier, Devji says is wholly missing from the 19th century Muslim intellectuals. This also is well illustrated by another question. Do I have 2 minutes? Yeah. Okay. So another question is to do with the historiography of modern India. And very celebrated historian, which most of you may have read as well, Partha Chatterjee, he remarks in one of his articles, it's called History and the Nationalization of Hinduism, published in 92. Towards the end of the article, after having demonstrated that the kind of very intimate imbrication of history, modern Indian history and Hinduism in India, he laments that the classical heritage of Islam has so far remained external to Indian history. Now, I'm again wondering whether a kind of persuasion in historiography that was that has been, demonstrated in the book by Professor Habib and Dr. Shauna's presentation, can we say that whether a revisionist reading of Azad can rehabilitate the classical heritage of Islam to Indian history? Now, I'm just thinking aloud, and of course, with my limited interest in the life of modernity, I can only take a side view into history. So that is my limitation. And I think I was also encouraged by another article that Aisha Jalal wrote on how Azad, which was also the point of discussion yesterday, very well pronounced in presentation by Professor Habib, that how, as well as Dr. Shauna's, that how he reconfigured the much loaded and maligned concept that we call jihad in a completely different way. He refashions it in order to address a problem that truly belongs to the secular history of the time, that is the imperial history, that how jihad can not only mobilize, but as an Islamic imperative, can address the problem of global imperialism. And so is the case with the idea of Tawheed, which is very brilliantly, I must say, brought out in an article that Dr. Shauna brought out a couple of years ago, where Tawheed is not merely the oneness of God, rather it is the oneness of the manifest, different ways in which it manifests in our lived world, and hence cuts across an active, faithful proclamation of the oneness of God. So I will stop here, and thank you again for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Any comments, sir? Can you do it?
No, I totally agree with what Danish said just now, but I have a little problem with when you talk about this modernity, and because I feel little diffident, when I use these terms of Hindu or Muslim or Islam or whatever, when we talk of 19th century, like Faisal Devji, when he talks about apologetic modernity, because it was almost derivative, it came from Europe and all that. So there was, so in that case, how are we going to place Ram Mohan Roy, who is called Herald of Modern Age in India? And we don't see him as just a Hindu modernist. He is talking of modernity in India, beginning modernity in India for all Indians, Hindus as well as Muslims. Though he emphasizes on Hinduism more than Islam. Though he was trained in a madrasa, brought up as a Persian scholar, he had a background and strength to speak for everyone. But anyway, he engaged with Hinduism more than others. But despite that, he spoke about modernity which he inherited from the West. Whatever he read, despite being a Persian scholar and an Oriental scholar. So when he writes a letter to Lord Amherst in 1823, what is he saying? He's saying that we have to don't teach Oriental studies and sciences and languages. Teach English. That is what is going to bring about change in this country. So this is something which is not confined only to Aligarh school later on, much later. But even modernity in general in India begins this way. So I don't expect you to answer.
Yeah, just that in that specific article, he very particularly distinguishes what he means by apologetic to be different from derivative. He says it is not derivative, precisely because he says that by identifying the terms of modernity that originates in Europe, these intellectuals, Muslim intellectuals based in Aligarh and around, they read it back into early Islam. So that for him makes it apologetic.
Please.
Thank you for your comments. I thought, that particular note on modernity was very interesting. But I want to go to your invocation of Chatterjee's argument that Islam has not been seen as the inheritance of India in Indian historiography. And I wonder whether that's true. We've had such major histories about Islam coming out in Urdu or in Hindi. After all, historiography is not just something that has been constructed in the Indian language in India. We also have many major histories in English on the heritage of Islam in India, coming out from universities like AMU, and across the world. And I wonder if, the problem lies more with historians who construct Indian history as maybe Bengali history, rather than with Indian historiography as a whole, because Indian historiography is so rich with accounts. And today there is accounts of Indian Ocean Islam, for example, or Islam in the South as well. And of course, Partho made that comment in the 90s, but I think he would, his position would still be the same.
I absolutely agree. Precisely because this of late, there's been a greater focus on the exchanges across the ocean, and in fact, along the coast and across, extending up to the Southeast Asian nations, there has been, I would say, a great degree of revision on the formation of Islamic laws and how the exchanges of scholarship on Islam greatly traveled along these coasts. So, but Partha Chatterjee, in that article, which I would fairly admit that probably today he won't say that, but I do think that he's not talking about in that statement. He's not referring to the heritage of Islam in the way that you're talking about AMU or other such structures as an illustration of heritage. But he says classical heritage of Islam, and adds a qualifier that Islam's presence in Indian history is either in the form of an external, invasion or intrusion, or domesticated elements of everyday life, but not so much in Indian history, so to speak. So, which of course remains difficult not to unravel. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have completed 4 papers. The last paper is by Professor Imtiaz Hasan sir. I request Professor Imtiaz Hasan, please.
Good afternoon to all of you. Assalamu alaikum. I think I was sitting separated from my other distinguished colleagues who largely dominated the politics and the history. That gave me a sense of sublimated aloneness. Because I'm a linguist. I'm a social linguist. Neither like Danish, I have some kind of an engagement with history, nor with politics. But we do talk about politics with regard to the language. So here is the element of sublimated aloneness for me. And from that background, I thought that I'll take you to another dimension of looking at Azad. The dimension that takes us to what social linguists, this is my vocation, and a dabbling that I have been doing with regard to the critical social linguistics. From that perspective, I have chosen a topic which is audience design and Maulana Azad. And I'm looking at the style dominance and a biographical indexicalities that are found reflected from some of the select essays, that is writings, letters that I've taken from Azad in Urdu. There were certain questions that really came to my mind when I was reading Professor Habib, your book. And honestly, let me tell you that besides reading Ghubar-e-Khatir in English, not in Urdu, it's the first time that I did something dedicated reading on Maulana Azad. And I found it, from my little background that I have of history and political science, quite interesting. The only thing that I felt was, as a linguist and as a social linguist, I felt that there were certain questions that could have been raised in the book. And you have talked about certain moments. In fact, there have been certain moments where you did talk about when Azad had some kind of angst and anxieties when things were said about Prophet, where he was concerned about that. He wanted to do something. He condemned the Muslims who had taken up a response, not the way Sir Sajjad took the response in response to William Moyes. But perhaps Azad did not take up or commit himself to writing with that kind of a response. Another thing that really intrigued me, and that again you talked about it in your book, that then there were also occasions when he had the sense of integrative. You have used the term there, if I recall, integrative phase that emerged in his writing, in his projection. He did articulate, but again, it just remained at the level of what he spoke. He was closely associated with Gandhi, but there was no way that he could really imbibe the kind of a language that Gandhi used for communication. Of course, the objectives were very different, but there was no aspiration, there was no motivation to really use that language, the language of communication that Gandhi had. And the other very important thing that really came to my mind when I was reading your book, sir, was that there had been several correspondences with Khwaja Hassan Nizami, which had appeared in both Urfi's and Malik Ram's collections. There were conversations as a kind of an attack and very heated exchanges between both Azad and Nizami, Hassan Nizami, over the use of Urdu. The nature of Urdu that Azad was using was mostly a Perso-Arabicized Urdu, and Hassan was very much in favor of a language which was communicable to all. And in fact, I don't recall where, but a very polemical statement that was made that Azad ke intiqal par Urdu bhi dafan ho gayi. This was, of course, a very polemical statement, but it was made somewhere. I don't recall the reference. So I cannot talk about that right now. But I felt that a discussion dedicated on language could have found place in your book. Now, coming to the reason why I chose to talk about the audience design, See, way back in 1863, Sir Sajjad was invited by Latif Ahmad Khan in Calcutta. And that was late 60s, 1860s, that he was also spreading that Mohammedan English education. And Sir Sajjad was also doing the same. And he was called there to deliver a lecture in his house, a very private gathering, where the people who had attended the lecture had a very good knowledge of Urdu as a language of capital and as a language of linguistic capital both, as a culture capital and linguistic capital both. At the same time, they also had a knowledge of Persian. Sir Sajjad deliberately chose to speak in Persian. And the entire lecture was delivered in Persian, which was later translated into Urdu. One bad translation by Mannan, and the other good translation by, I think, a son or the grandson of Latif Ahmad Khan.
That is in English.
English. That was the English. So, but that the entire lecture was in Persian. Now, that triggered my interest in looking at the audience design. Because when I'm talking about audience design, as I said in the beginning, that for me, as a social linguist, we are more concerned with the contextualization of language. We are more concerned with the way the multiple attentional targets are addressed to, and the way you change your style of addressing. When Sir Sajjad was doing it, Sir Sajjad had an opportunity to talk in Urdu, but he did not do so. And he chose a particular style, which from the social linguistics point of view, we call it as an act of performing a style dominance. And there is also a kind of agentive involvement that comes about when you are doing it by taking the entire biographical account of yours and creating an interface of dialogue with the audience, with the setting. And you indulge in what I have used, another key term in my presentation, called biographical indexicality. This is a background in which I thought that I'll justify with one stroke both my position as a chair professor and also as someone who can engage with Azad from social linguistics, from language point of view also. And perhaps maybe when I do so, there's every possibility that you may find certain misses in there from history, from politics. But my focus will be on language. As I mentioned, that both these aspects, they triggered me to look at the writings, some writings of Azad, and see how exactly, as a social linguist, which is of late become very sensitive in its analysis of how language is socially contextualized, and subsequently became more interested in the aspect of social meaning. The contemporary social linguistic research has gone further beyond it to look into the relationship between intra and interlanguage. That these are the resources to create social meaning with respect to the personal and relational identities. And these meanings relate to how a speaker projects their persona or identity, and how a speaker projects an image of relationship between themselves and another person. Now, the central insight of this audience design comes from the writings of Alan Bell. The model says the speaker designs their speech for their audience to construct different qualities of social situations and social relationships. Now, when we are talking about when we're talking about Maulana Azad, I'm talking about his style, the choice of his style, which I found very different when he addresses the audiences. The differences that are there, which I've tried to analyze by taking a particular metric. The method that I employed was a method which we call it as lectal focusing instrument. And this is what I did with regard to the lexical focusing, in fact, in interaction that you have, where the focusing was more concerned with what has been the focus with regard to the stances that Azad takes, and with regard to the topic and the audience that Azad takes when he writes. The procedure that was there, which I took, of course, I don't have time to talk about in detail, so I'll skip everything. I took the extracts from different speeches, different letters of Azad, and different addresses that he gave. And I just sliced them into units for the analysis, taking one unit with certain token words which comprise both the content and the functional words together. And when I was looking at the content and functional words, of course, my concentration was more on the content words, because I was trying to look into the frequency of uses of Arabic, Persian, Indic. And since Azad also knew French, as you have rightly pointed out, and I was aware of that, so I thought that I'll also take French because he was a multilingual. So I was trying to bring out the percentage of uses of these words in a text, which were divided into units, and each unit I had taken about average, there were about 12 token words that I had taken from his speeches. I'll skip those things because I understand the time limitation. Throughout the interactions that Azad had, he could maintain the use of all the three styles very prominently: the Arabic, the Persian, and the Indic style. And that is, from the linguistics point of view, we say that he had a command over language which was a perfect command in terms of the language mode. This is evident from Azad being a multilingual speaker. However, the audience and topic effects, they showed clear skewing and style shifting. A closer look at Azad's micro-level style shifts within individual interactions showed some subtle signs of dominance of his first language, that is Arabic, and a clear attrition of French. And of course, next to that, after Arabic, was Persian. But in most of the writings that I had taken, what I found was very clearly he took the couplets and the phrases from Arabic, from Persian, from Urdu. And depending upon where he was addressing his audience, be it a khutbah in the mosque, or be it a letter to a friend, depending upon that, there was a change in the salutation form of Azad. Very clearly marked changes in the salutation forms. And not only that, if he is addressing the audience, which is not a learned audience in terms of, quote, Persian Arabic learned audience, then his salutations are invariably Arabic and very rarely Persian. And when it comes to the use of the second person pronouns, I found that the use of the respectful form of the second person pronoun, aap, along with his acceptable syntactic arrangement, when you say aap aiye or aap suniye, was very prominent when he was addressing to his friends, when he was addressing to people with learned background. And when it comes to not, rather those who had the non-learned background, he was indulging more in the second person pronoun of tum and following the same syntactic agreement that was expected from a person of his caliber. I'll just finish it off now by saying, I'll not give the examples because, but I'll say that Azad has, I'll just come to the last point, okay? In fact, when I looked at this speech carefully, I found that, there is always a possibility to have a turning off of the styles. But what was very, very prominent in case of Azad was that there was a kind of a rebuke, a kind of a sarcasm, a kind of ironic expressions that he constantly used when he was addressing his audience. And a very remarkable thing that I observed in the last speech that he gave on 47, that was a speech that demonstrates the use of direct speech, opening with an explicit frankness of honesty, introducing a negative, contrary, or skeptical stance that often also involves this type of let's be honest, which is very prominent there. And that kind of a voicing emerged from that speech. And for someone who is engaged in a critical social linguistics, I may further add to say that perhaps all such agentive exploitations that I could see in terms of biographical indexicality could be what Professor Sajjad was attributing to as something which may have put the Muslims on a defense that they are the people responsible for the partition, which emerges from the speech of Azad. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any question? Otherwise, I'll ask you to give some comment.
No question. I will just thank you for your insights, because as a social linguist, you have the skills to go into that sort of arena, because I am totally deprived of those skills at all.
You did a wonderful things, Professor, but I just thought that...
Anyway, I have my own limited skills, so I can't go beyond that. So your comments is an enrichment of the work if I take it up in future, because these insights should definitely be raised by any scholar, me or anybody else. They deserve mention at all.
मैं उर्दू ही में बोलता हूँ। अब आपने ऑडियंस डिज़ाइन की बात की। सर सैयद इस मामले में बहुत प्रैग्मेटिक थे। जहाँ से चंदा लेना होता था तो चंदा देने वालों की लैंग्वेज बोलते थे, और वहाँ फारसी नहीं बोलते तो वो जो इंटेलेक्चुअल गैदरिंग थी वो इम्प्रेस्ड नहीं होती। अदरवाइज कहा जाता है कि इंडियन सब कॉन्टिनेंट में पब्लिक स्पीकर जो कॉमन ऑडियंस को एड्रेस करे वो पहला सर सैयद थे। हाल ही ने एक लाइन लिखा हयात जावेद में, बाद में डेविड लेलीवेल ने अपनी उस मशहूर किताब के बहुत बाद एक एक्सक्लूसिव ऐसे भी लिखा है इनके सर सैयद के ऑडियंस इसके लिए, वो शायद अब बहुत हेल्पफुल पाएंगे उस ऐसे को। मैं आता हूँ अपने सब्जेक्ट पे जिस पे हम लोग डिस्कशन कर रहे हैं। ये रंगीला सर सैयद के ज़माने में तो उन्होंने विलियम मुइर से इंगेजमेंट किया और जो भी है वो सब जानते हैं, तो उसको दोहराने की ज़रूरत नहीं है। ये रंगीला रसूल कंट्रोवर्सी आई थी। अब मुझे ये पता नहीं है कि आज़ाद ने उस पर उस तरह का कोई एक्सपोजिशन किया या नहीं जो सर सैयद ने विलियम मुइर के रिस्पॉन्स में किया था। उसमें एक और बात है, कल वीसी साहब ने एक सवाल पूछा था इकबाल और आज़ाद में कोई कॉरेस्पॉन्डेंस या डिबेट क्यों नहीं था। शायद आज़ाद मदनी के थ्रू करा रहे थे या क्या, ये तो शायद है, एविडेंस नहीं है। उस रंगीला रसूल डिबेट में ये हुआ था कि उसने इल्मुद्दीन ने पब्लिशर को मार दिया था, फिर इल्मुद्दीन को सज़ा हो गई थी फांसी की। इकबाल ने इल्मुद्दीन का साथ दिया था, उस जनाजे में शरीक भी हुए थे, एंड इट वाज अ ह्यूज कंट्रोवर्सी। और ये इंट्रिगिंग है कि इकबाल के इस एक्ट पर आज़ाद या वो भी जो ये कोई इस पे कुछ बोल नहीं रहे थे, या अगर बोले तो हम लोग की जानकारी में नहीं है। तो मुझे लगता है कि यहाँ पे आज़ाद स्टडीज़ में जिन जिन लोगों का इंटरेस्ट होगा ये एस्पेक्ट एक्सप्लोर होना चाहिए। और ये जो आप ऑडियंस डिज़ाइन का कह रहे हैं, एक बच्चे हैं या फैकल्टी मेंबर हैं, सवाल बहुत ही पर्टिनेंट पूछा था कि सुलेमान नदवी वाला। सुलेमान नदवी इवेंचुअली वो पाकिस्तान चले गए और आज़ाद की कोई राइटिंग उस पर कोई रिस्पॉन्स नहीं है। अनलाइक नेहरू जो जोश से बराबर वो कर रहे हैं, बार बार परसुएट कर रहे हैं कि तुम आ जाओ, और जोश ने यादों की बारात में कन्फेस भी किया है कि इट वाज फूल ऑन माय पार्ट दैट आई डिडंट लिसन टू नेहरू, क्योंकि वहाँ उनकी बहुत बुरी हालत हो गई थी। तो ये जो कम्युनिकेशन का प्रॉब्लम है ये स्कॉलर्स को एड्रेस करना चाहिए। अगेन आई एम कमिंग टू द कंट्रोवर्शियल बुक दैट आई रिफर टू। इन्होंने सवाल किया था, मुशरुल हक ने बहुत क्लियरली कहा है कि नेशन और इस तरह के जितने क्वेश्चंस थे, उस क्वेश्चन को जिस लैंग्वेज में आज़ाद एड्रेस कर रहे थे वो लैंग्वेज आज़ाद के ही उलमा नहीं समझ रहे थे। दैट शुड बी टेकन एज वन ऑफ द रीजंस व्हाई व्हेन पुश केम टू शोव दे वेंट ओवर टू दैट साइड। तो ये जो ऑडियंस डिज़ाइन है इसमें इन क्वेश्चंस को भी एक्सप्लोर करने की कोशिश की जानी चाहिए। थैंक यू। जी।
Yeah, I just want to follow up on what. I just wanted to follow up on what Professor Sajjad said. And to also maybe go back to that question: why can't we consider Azad as a leader? I think if language structures our world, which it does, And Azad is using languages that existed in a former world, a Persianate world, pre-colonial world maybe, the world that he occupied and he traveled across, but the bulk of India didn't. His capacity to become a mass leader becomes fairly limited. And so he has to constantly make these switches away from languages that shaped his mind to a language that can speak to an audience that he chose, this Indian nationalist public. And so while he strived to make this nationalist public something else, maybe an ethical public, a democratic public, not just a public that is steeped in everyday politics, language constantly becomes his limitation, so to speak.
That's what I wanted to highlight. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. The beauty of this seminar is, earlier we generally understand that when you're talking about Maulana Azad, the historian will come and they will have a discussion. But here it's totally different. Only one, two historians are sitting. People from the English department, people from the political scientists are speaking, historian is speaking, and one important aspect is the linguistic. I mean, the Professor Imtiaz Hassan is very important contribution he has made in this, how one can understand Maulana Azad. Five, all of them are very relevant, and I just wanted to say you what Sajjad has said about his paper. Not much comment I can make. The only thing is that with the book which he is quoting has always been a discussion, because he was one of the critics of Maulana Azad. But in this book, we should take care, but this book was not taken considered at all by Professor Habib, which is a recent book which has not been given. One important thing is that as far as the migration is concerned, which you said, Professor Habib, that people migrated from India, it is not only that Western UP, but entire India, the migration from India to Pakistan was only the elite class. You just survey the people, particularly the Bihar and the Eastern UP and Calcutta, is most of the people, those who have gone to Bangladesh, I'm not talking. I'm just talking about the person who have visited Bengal, they are an elite class. The labor class has not migrated from India, it was only the elite class. Those who were educated, either 10th or 12th or matric or whatever, because of the good job and all that. And the secondly is the critic is the what you have said, it has to be critically analyzed, and it's a very good scope for a student to work on that, and they can analyze things also. And Amir, the loneliness, I do not understand. I mean, the way you are speaking, his loneliness because of the photographs and because of this and various writing has also quoted by Ye. But I think this can also be understood not only necessarily that the way you have been taking loneliness, you can also see in the manner that the man has everybody has their own personality. Maulana was not a personality that everybody go and have and chat and all. He has his own personality. We all have our own personality, so he must have his own personality. He was not comfortable with the mixing with everybody. That could be one reason, but I consider. But as far as Nehru and Azad friendship is concerned, that is very correct. I mean, I totally agree with that. Both of them were really intellectual. Either you talk about Nehru or you talk about Azad. They were intellectually very par excellence. There's no uncontroverted. So that was the probably reason why they were having very good relation with each other, number one. Number two, what I said, it is not only Nehru, Azad was the only person, but you try to understand the level of the person, Azad, I'm talking about Azad, he had made a great impact on the top leader of that particular, either it is Azad, it is Nehru or Gandhi. He has got impact, he has a wolf, he used to meet with a full dignity. Is it possible today to meet the way he has been meeting with the Prime Minister or any other top leader, for any Muslim leader, to try to compare with the present scenario? It is simply not possible, the way, the life which he has existed in that particular period. Then we have good information by Shana, because I just also wanted to speak on this thing. Very relevant information. You have summarized the book of, in fact, the brief review has been made. but you have not critically analyzed his book. So this one could be, sir, one question from my side is that you have made very good book. Unfortunately, I read full book. The day you called me, I ordered and I read full book. It's a very good book, and undoubtedly. And the way the sources, because being a student of history, we only emphasize on the sources, the word sources you have used. You are very rich in analyzing the sources, particularly the Urdu sources and all that. But I have one question in my mind. Did you have encounter any Hindi sources? Because that time there was a number of work has been done by Hindi scholars also. So we don't have any, only when you're working on the Maulana is only confined to Urdu. Can we see the other sources also? This is why I consider, because a lot of work has been done in that, so that we can also see what the Hindi writers or Hindi newspaper are publishing about the Maulana. That is one thing which I wanted to understand from this book. And then the relevant, the historical writing which you say that about the historical writing, the changes, that's a very important question which you have raised. Why? But when you talk about the historical writing, the place of Maulana has been properly placed. You cannot. Yes, let me finish. Let me finish. It's not, Juma is not the thing that everybody has to go for namaz. Those who are interested, they can give. You cannot make Juma like is an imposition of 20 things. Yeah, that is okay, but that cannot be in academic research. That cannot be the reason for that. That cannot be a reason for any academic gathering. I do not agree. Namaz is your personal thing. The second point which I also wanted to think, that Nehru is a leader. So whenever you're talking about any period, the leader has been given them much importance. He was not the main leader. The main leader was Nehru and Gandhi. So of course, Gandhi and Nehru has. Even today, if you're going to write the history of this particular period, of course, the main person will get the main space. So that was the reason for. But those who are working on that was the reason why we have started encouraging this thing. And finally, two important paper by Danish. Danish, your work is especially based on the Fazal Dib, that is the work which you have said. And I think Fazal Dib's ideas of apologistic modality, that is a very debatable topic. This is the one thing which he has started giving, but it has a debate on that. But lastly, and finally, I'll speak for Imtiaz sir. Imtiaz sir, this very important paper for us. It's enlightening for us, everybody. But I just wanted to, just one example you have given, just the word which is aap aiye, aap suniye, this is a word. I just wanted from you that these type of words should be highlighted here. What are the main word he used to speak? That like aap aiye, aap baithiye, aap suniye. If you could have given some of the words which was, so that would be better. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for taking my 2 minutes extra. Thank you.
बहुत ही शानदार इजलास था और तमाम पार्टिसिपेंट्स ने बहुत अच्छी गुफ्तगू की, बहुत सारी मालूमात में इजाफा हुआ। सज्जाद भाई ने बहुत सारे सवाल किए और उन सवालों पर गौर करने की ज़रूरत है और हमने तमाम लोगों से कुछ ना कुछ सीखा और उम्मीद है कि जब हम मौलाना आज़ाद पर फिर नया कोई आने वाले दिनों में फिर कोई जब सेमिनार करेंगे, मुज़ाकरा करेंगे, तो इन सवालों पर भी गौर किया जाएगा। आप तमाम का बेहद शुक्रिया और जितने भी हमारे यहाँ मेहमानान हैं, प्रोफेसर सैयद इरफान हबीब साहब हैं, सज्जाद साहब हैं, शौना हैं, डॉक्टर आमिर हैं, दानिश हैं और इस प्रोग्राम के जो होस्ट्स हैं प्रोफेसर इम्तियाज हसनैन साहब और सदर मोहतरम प्रोफेसर दानिश मोइन साहब और इम्तियाज हसनैन साहब और प्रोफेसर एहतशाम साहब, आप तमाम का बेहद शुक्रिया। और मीडिया सेंटर के जो हमारे साथी हैं जो सुबह से 9:30 बजे से यहाँ तशरीफ फरमा है, आप सबका शुक्रिया। तलबा और तालिबात का शुक्रिया। बाहर चाय का भी इंतजाम है। स्टेट डिपार्टमेंट, PR डिपार्टमेंट और इसके अलावा जितने भी हमारे जो वॉलंटियर्स हैं MCJ डिपार्टमेंट के, आप तमाम का शुक्रिया। जितने भी असातिज़ा हैं, आमना मैम है, आप मेहमान हैं, आपका नाम नहीं मालूम मुझे, आप तमाम का बेहद शुक्रिया कि आपने डेलिब्रेशंस में भी जो शोखरोश के साथ हिस्सा लिया। हम सब ने बहुत कुछ सीखा। बेहद शुक्रिया। खुदा हाफिज़।